Hey, what's up? I'm Justin with NRN, the Nobull Racing Network, and we have just finished round 14 of the SRL Championship in Malaysia, and boy was it wet and wild. So let's dive into the race and recap all the action from the Malaysian Grand Prix. The big news going into today's race was McLaren driver Killian Brady would be stepping away from his seat to focus on his racing with esports. He was the championship leader going into Malaysia by a pretty dang sizable margin, I'd say. However, with Brady stepping out of the car, that's pretty much going to hand the championship lead to Bart Gelder. And Gelder was about 28 points behind Brady going into the race, so he was certainly one to watch. And with his biggest competition now gone, Gelder was smelling that championship, and he put his Red Bull on the pole for the 8th time this season. Francis McGinn would start next door to him in second, and Rene van der Stoep would roll off the grid in third. But Malaysia, it never disappoints, and when it came time for the lights to go out, it would be pouring rain. It was a slow but fairly clean start to the race for Gelder. Banner Ricchetti, though, in the Red Bull, he had some issues at the start, and that would cost him big after starting up front. He would fall all the way to dead last on the field. Sam Brandt and Louis Quinlan would make contact on the very first lap, so the rain out there was playing havoc with the drivers. Up front, though, Bart Gelder was in his own zip code as he started to pull away from Francis McGinn. Mid-pack, though, saw some great racing on lap 2 as Lewis Marshall made a daring move on Sandro Doulis and Niek to pick up 6th. So even though it was raining, that was not stopping these guys from being very aggressive out there. And Sandro Doulis, who won this race in the opening season, would be forced to pit on lap number 2 for a fresh wing, and that would put him all the way back to 12th, so Sandro was going to have some work to do in this one. Banner Ricchetti, who started up front and dropped all the way back to last, he started to slowly climb his way back towards the front, and by lap number 3, he was up to 9th. Some wet and wild racing on lap number 4 when van der Stoep got into Verpatten as they battled for 6th, and then just ahead of them, Lewis Marshall made a very bold move on the inside of Cameron Weston Edwards, and those two would get together. That would allow Verpatten and van der Stoep to join that fight, but Lewis Marshall, after having a great start to the race, would be forced to retire. He would not be able to continue after that. In third place, Van Gelder looked to be struggling in the rain just a tad. This was his third race in the rain. His first race in the rain was at Spa, where he put up a pretty good showing, but he was struggling in the rain in Mexico. And in Malaysia, he was all over the racetrack, but it seemed to be working for him because he was actually catching Francis McGinn out there. So if it works, don't fix it. Lap 8, Cameron Weston Edwards and Verpatten were having a great battle for 4th, though Edwards would pick up the 4th place spot. In fact, some of the best racing on the track seemed to be between Edwards, Verpatten, and van der Stoep. The three of those guys put on one hell of a show and never ran into one another, which was absolutely surprising. Brilliant racing out there for several laps. Lap number 11, the leaders would begin to pit, and that awesome battle between Edwards and van der Stoep would actually take to the pits, with van der Stoep making that pass on Edwards after the pit stop. Sandro Doulis had pitted on lap 2, so he actually started to move up the running order just a tad as some of the leaders made a pit stop, but he was off sequence and would have to pit again. Lap 12, the leader Gelder would hit the pits with a 21-second lead. Niek van Gelder would inherit the lead at that point, but he still needed to make a pit stop. His lead would be short-lived, though, because Gelder would be able to make his pit stop, rejoin the race, and run down van Gelder and reclaim the lead from him. Francis McGinn, who chased Gelder for the majority of the race, would be 11 seconds behind after that round of pit stops, so Gelder was out there kicking ass and taking names. Sandro Doulis' troubles would continue, though. He would get to racing Sam Brandt in the Haas and would lose his front wing and would be forced to pit for repairs. Sandro would roll the dice, though, and go ahead and switch to those intermediate tires. And Sandro looked like he had his hands full out there with that Ferrari. That car was slipping and sliding all over, and it may have just been a tad soon to switch to those intermediate tires, but hey, I like the gamble, and sometimes you just have to try something different. So I like that call. Cameron Weston Edwards also put on intermediate tires, but it wasn't working for him either. On lap 18, Brandt would pick up that spot rather easily. So even though blue skies were starting to poke through the clouds, the intermediate tires still didn't seem to want to work out there. 7 laps to go though, the rain had slowed and Francis McGinn came in for intermediate tires. He was running in second place. That would give Gelder second. And he would be the only driver still on the full wets, and he was making them work because he was actually starting to pull away from McGinn on the full wets, and McGinn was in the intermediate tires. The wet still seemed to be the tire that would work the best with 7 laps to go. But the best racing in the closing laps was between Sam Elvin and Cameron Weston Edwards. Fantastic racing as they battled for 6th place. They ran side by side, crossed over one another, just brilliant and unbelievable racing in the closing laps. They were bumping and banging and slamming into one another, and finally the two would make contact on the last lap of the race, and Edwards would slam the wall and Sam Elvin would pick up that spot. Having a career day, Elvin would finish the race in 6th place. And you just knew it was going to end that way eventually. Those two were racing so hard, but great stuff out there on the racetrack, and thanks to both of those drivers for some of that racing, because that was brilliant to watch. Gelder would pick up the win, and sometime later that day, the rest of the field would finish the race too. Gelder was just in his own world out there for the entirety of that race. He would win his 7th race of the season, but still not good enough to get the point lead. He's still about 7 points back, so probably the next race he'll get the lead. Gelder would finish in 2nd place. He was able to hold off Francis McGinn, and McGinn would finish in 3rd. That would be your podium finishers from the SRL Malaysian Grand Prix. And I was surprised though at the wet weather tires. They were so much better than the intermediates. Gelder, he stayed on the wets and was able to pull away from Francis McGinn, who was on the intermediate tires during that race. And even as the track dried, the wets just seemed to be the good tire to stay with. The guys who switched over to the intermediates definitely had their hands full. I remember Sandro switched over first, and his Ferrari was just all out of sorts. You could clearly see that. So brilliant job for him keeping it on the racetrack. That must have been like driving on ice out there. And the track never did dry up enough though to get on the slick tires. But very surprised at how well the wet weather tires worked out there during the race. So it is my honor now to hand out the first SRL Nobull Driver of the Race award, and I'm going to hand it to Sam Elvin in the Renault. What a drive for Elvin. So Sam Elvin is the first recipient of the Nobull Driver of the Race award. Congratulations, Sam Elvin. Good racing out there this afternoon from Malaysia. Tune in a few weeks for round 15 in Singapore. That's a tough street circuit under the lights and one of my favorite places to race, so looking forward to that one. That should be a very good race. Be sure to follow the SRL League on YouTube to find out about the latest news and view each and every race. That's SRL League F1 on YouTube. I'm Justin with NRN, the Nobull Racing Network. Thanks for tuning in. What a great race. We'll see you next time. Take it easy.